You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. We're in studio for our third and final segment with Jenn Clamen from the Coalition for Sex Worker Rights. Jen, how are you doing?
I'm good.
All right, let's tackle on a few more questions. All right, what can you tell me about the men who work as sex workers and what capacity of their clients are, men or women? Anything that you may shed some light.
Most of the men working in the industry are servicing male clients, so it's a lot of it's happening in the gay community. There are a few men who are servicing women, but it's very rare, mainly because women aren't necessarily encouraged to ask for sex or to buy sex or to express their sexual desires. So there's not a culture of demanding sex in women's culture, so there's not as much of a market for it, unfortunately. Because I think a lot of people would enjoy it. Yeah.
Do you think that men experience different challenges as sex workers than women do?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, for men, I know it's really hard. Sometimes you've got to keep it hard. Like, it's a really big challenge. I would say that's one of the challenges. In terms of the stigma, that's also. I mean, stigma, etc., is as big of a challenge. Finding clientele if you're servicing women would be one of the challenges, but legitimizing in general the trade of the laws are quite a challenge as well. I have to say the men aren't affected as much by the laws necessarily because they're not applied so much to the men, because again there's a culture around men having sex as more accepted. So
they're not stigmatized by the law as often as women.
Not as stigmatized as much, but the law does apply. It just isn't necessarily applied. It applies.
It applies, but it's not applied.
Yes.
What can you tell me about women clients? I mean, do you think that if sex was a little bit more accepted in our society, there would be more women clients?
If it was yeah, I definitely think so, for sure. I mean, a lot of women go to strip clubs and they giggle and they laugh when they do it, but they're going. But they're going as a joke. I mean, but when men go to strip clubs, they're going and they're very serious about it. They're going to actually see naked women, and so there's it's kind of silly for women to be asking for sex, and it's kind of like hee. But men, it's okay for them to be doing it, and I think that's sort of one of the problems with the industry is that it's not necessarily égal because of that. Like it's not equal. But I mean, I think there is a market for it. But I mean, also one of the problems is women are making a lot less money than men, so they don't necessarily have the income to pay for sex workers to visit them.
I once interviewed a professional escort, and she talked about our society as a touch-starved society. Mm-hmm. And I'd like any thoughts you may have on that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, I mean, I think that sort of, it goes into what I was saying about the acceptance of sex and sexuality and having multiple partners and not even just multiple partners, but understanding your sexuality a little bit more as something other than the missionary position, as something other than a task, but something that can be enjoyed and explored. And I think, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that's how I'd describe it, touch-starved, but I would say that one of the reasons the industry exists is because one of the great things about the industry is that it responds to a need for people to be able to explore their sexuality and to explore their needs and their fantasies, etc. So,
can you tell me if you have any knowledge about the international legal status of sex work? Are there countries where sex work is perfectly legal, and how does that affect their immediate society?
Yeah, there's one model of law around prostitution that we sort of aim towards, and that's the New Zealand model, which is in New Zealand in 2003, sex work was decriminalized. And that decriminalization model is something we aim towards. It's not perfect, but more or less it's what we're looking for. In the USA, everything is completely illegal. So, I mean, there's tons and tons and tons of repression and a lot of secrecy around the industry. Countries like Amsterdam, you've got a legalized system where people can work in brothels, they can work in windows, etc. Countries like Sweden, it's only the clients that are criminalized, and so the sex workers are okay to work, but the clients aren't allowed to buy sex, which is really brutal too, because once you criminalize the clients, you're also criminalizing the sex workers. In Germany, they have legalized sex work. In Japan, vaginal sex actually isn't illegal. Vaginal sex is illegal, but anal sex isn't legal. isn't illegal. Sorry, it's okay to have anal sex, but it's not okay to have vaginal sex. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
In Japan. So I mean, the laws vary, but the only decriminalized system that we see is in New Zealand, and that's the model we're sort of aiming towards.
When regulating sexuality, where will the lines be drawn, do you think?
I think that people have a hard time regulating the sex trade, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that people will have a hard time around the health and safety issue. I think people are really panicked that sex workers are giving everybody HIV. That isn't the case, and we know that from research, from realities, but I think people are panicked around that. So I think what tends to happen is sex workers are mandated to use condoms or mandated for HIV tests. It's very dangerous to do that because it lends the impression that sex workers are the only ones who are at risk of HIV. It also gives the client the impression that it's okay to have sex without a condom. So it's dangerous to do that, but I think people have a hard time getting around that. I think also regulating it, the lines are definitely going to be drawn age. I think the under 18 thing will still remain. Around where brothels can be placed, don't place it next to a church, don't place it next to a young school, etc. So I think people will still want to hide it a little bit, but generally, yeah.
That brings me to my next question.